Hello, everyone, and Happy New Year, seasoners. I hope you all had a great Xmas and New Year's, and I hope the hangovers are not too rough today. I promise to talk real softly in case you have a headache. No matter, today's guest is guaranteed to get rid of your New Year's hangover. Just don't quote me on that. I have waited more than a year to interview this guest. Was it because they were playing hard to get? No. They just did not see my message in Facebook Messenger. It happens. A lot of you probably have invitations from me and have never checked your other inbox. So please do that this year. Thank you. She worked for Club Med from 2015 to 2022, and her first season was in Club Med Cancun as a reception GO. She became a chef de village in 2019, and then in 2021, she was named the Public Relations and Corporate Social Responsibility Manager for North America and the Caribbean. Who is this mystery guest that is kicking off another year of my first season? Well, it's the one and truly only Sophia Lykke. Sophia, Happy New Year. How are you?
I'm great. How are you? Happy New Year as well. I'm so excited to be talking to you today.
Yes, we have more in store in 2024, and you are helping me kick it off. So thank you so much.
I'm honored. I'm honored to be able to start the new year for this podcast.
Thank you after a year for checking your messages and Facebook Messenger that, if you checked it sooner, well,
yes, it's
been
funny.
talking sooner.
When I first started following your podcast, I saw it on LinkedIn. And of course, I listened to some of my great mentors, Hammer and Howard. And I was like, this is just such a great podcast. I would love to go on and tell my story. And then I come to find after I connected with you that, you had already messaged me and I just never saw it. So I guess better late than never.
Yes, exactly. And, and then you probably wouldn't be helping me kick off the New Year's Eve one, right? I mean,
it was meant perfect to be this way. You're right.
All right. So you have a very interesting background. We'll get into that before we jump into Club Med. Born in LA. Dad's from Denmark. Mother's Japanese. And your mother, you told me, was a traffic and planning GO for 1 year in the 80s, correct?
Yes, exactly. So born and raised in California, very international, kind of mixed up culturally family. And my mom did have that Club Med experience in the early 80s and was always very fond of Club Med and had great memories from that time in her life. So yeah, I already had that exposure just from hearing about it from her secondhand.
And also, you attended UCLA. You have a bachelor's degree in international development studies with a minor in global studies. So you wanted to make it really hard on you, like when you were going there. Graduated magna cum laude. So we know you're very smart now.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. I'm going to try and, increase my vocabulary here this hour with you. Okay.
I was a very ambitious, and I should say very studious, very academic young person before, my Club Med days, which helped me grow into so many other things. So.
And we couldn't keep you away from school because last year, 2022, you had a hospitality management certificate from Cornell University, right?
Yes, I did. That was a fantastic program. I would recommend, eCornell online to anyone. They have a great range of courses, if you want to learn something new or just refresh your skills.
Was it rough having to go to school again and study? Like since you graduated in 2014, was it like a shock to you? Or
I'm someone actually who always really enjoyed school. I always really enjoyed learning and kind of having that mental stimulation. So I wouldn't have done it, I think, if I didn't feel that it was something I was motivated to do. But it is definitely a commitment, especially if you're working full time. You have to find the time in the evenings or sometimes even on the weekends to make sure you finish everything on time. So it wasn't too bad, but I wouldn't recommend someone to do it unless they were really committed to it, for sure. And I'm sure you know all about that. So
yeah, you just described my life now because work full time, school part time. But so we're friends like asking you, Sophia, it's Saturday night, let's go out. And you're like, oh no, I got to read this textbook. Is that what was happening?
Thankfully, no. The way that the course works is that they kind of recommend, whenever you start a new module, it tells you how many hours it's going to take and that you should do, X number of hours per day in order to keep it manageable. So I stayed pretty much on that track and it was fine for me. So thankfully, no, it didn't take over my life in that way. It was manageable.
Okay, good. So you graduate in 2014, like we said. Was this the moment where you said, before I start working, get a corporate job? Should I, or was your mom encouraging you to apply to Club Med? How did that
Yeah,
happen?
it's a great question because I mean, looking back on it now, it's so funny. It was the last thing that I ever thought that I would do at that moment because as I explained to you, I was at that time I was very, very studious, very academic, very serious, and I had all of these ideas about going straight to grad school and going into academia or going to work for the UN. I had a really these lofty ideas of what I wanted to do with my life and was trying to kind of figure out, okay, what's my next step? Where do I start? What's going to be the most intelligent way to invest my time in order to build this future that I wanted? And, as I was trying to kind of figure that all out, my mom came up with this idea one day and she said to me, I had such a great time when I was young working for Club Med, and I know that they're still out there. And I think that it would be a great experience for you just to live a little and loosen up and experience something other than just going to school. And, I was like, Mom, that's a terrible idea. Like, that's just going to distract me from my goals and I'm going to get off track. And, that doesn't really have anything to do with what I have in mind for the future. And she kept bringing it up, and it was funny because then I started to research Club Med. I knew about Club Med, but I started to look into it more. I think that after a few times of mentioning it, it started to pique my interest. And what really drew me to Club Med as a brand at that time is just all of the information that was out there about like the Club Med corporate foundation and Club Med's sustainability goals as like a sustainable hospitality company, which I think a lot of people don't even know when they think of Club Med. And so I was thinking, that's really cool. I'd like to be part of a company that's so active in that space, and they're kind of ahead of their time in that regard. And I've always loved traveling. I've always loved hotels. I grew up traveling. Both of my parents were in the travel and tourism industry. So I just thought, okay, why not? Let's just give it a try. I'll apply. Who knows if they'll even take me? Who knows if they'll ever even call me back? But if they do, then I'll just consider that that's fate. And, I'll go and do that for a summer and just have that experience and learn something new. So it was definitely her at the beginning suggesting it. And then I caved and I was glad that I did.
And where was your interview?
So I applied online initially, and then it ended up kind of being this serendipitous situation where Club Med was hosting one of their famous kind of audition rounds in LA, where I was, obviously living at that time, just 20 minutes from my parents' house at a hotel. So they called me and they said, hey, next week we have all of the HR teams and a couple of resort general managers, chef de villages, who will be at this audition looking for new talent for the resorts. So do you want to come? So I went to that audition round, and that's where it all started. It was, kind of a giant interview round. It kind of reminded me of like American Idol, where all of these people are sitting and waiting to be interviewed, and you kind of talk to a few different people and then hope that they're going to call you back to come and work in one of the villages.
And did you sing a song for your audition?
I think that you're very familiar with this process. And it was so funny to me because, I went in very formal. I think I was like wearing a blazer and I had a copy of my resume and
Oh boy.
yeah. So I did all of my interviews and I thought it was great. One of the people that interviewed me was Nicola Gala, who would go on to be my first chief of village. But so after all of that part of it was done, they kind of got everyone together and had us, act out these different scenarios and kind of do like a game of improv. And they kind of told us about the crazy signs, and they did a crazy sign for us. And then we had this challenge where we were broken up into teams and we had to create our own crazy sign. And this was where I was like, oh, this is going to be something that pushes me out of my comfort zone, because, performing or dancing in front of people is just so not something that I was comfortable with at that time. So I remember being a little bit nervous, but I did my best.
What song did you make up your crazy sign to?
Oh my gosh, I don't even remember. But what I do remember is that they taught us hands up, because that was kind of I think the easiest, slowest one for people to follow if they didn't know any of the crazy signs. And it's obviously a classic. So I just remember that song, right from the beginning. And it's just a song that people automatically associate with Club Med, of course.
So did you wind up in Cancun with Nicola by fluke, or did she like earmark you when she was interviewing you?
He,
Oh, sorry. Sorry. Okay.
no worries, Italian
Sorry,
name, yes.
Nicola. Mi dispiace molto, mi dispiace molto.
So yeah, so as I said at the audition, I spoke with a few different, recruiters, and then he asked to interview a few after kind of watching and observing, and so one of them was me, and it was very quick. We talked for maybe 10 minutes. He just asked about my background and why I was interested in Club Med, and then he had seen on my resume that I wrote that I was a Spanish speaker and a French speaker. So he said, okay, let's speak a little Spanish and like, let's test your skills. And, I was very comfortable with that. I had taken years of Spanish at that point, but the French, I was really just a beginner. And he's like, okay, so now let's see how you're doing with French. And I'm like, oh gosh, like, I don't think I can do a whole interview, but, I managed to answer some basic questions. I'm like, okay, I hope that was good enough. And then he told me, okay, thank you. And then that was it. And a week later, I got a call from Maria Torres, who is still, an HR business partner working for Club Med North America. She's incredible. She was my, in charge of my career for a number of years. So that was my first call I ever got from her saying, the chief of village at Club Med Cancun, Nicola Gala, really liked your profile, would like to invite you to come join his team there. And that was that.
And prior to Cancun in 2015, you had never even been to Club Med as a guest, right?
No, yeah, and it's so funny because obviously my mom had that connection, but as I was telling you earlier, both of my parents worked in the travel and tourism industry and had so many different industry connections that we really got to enjoy a lot of great trips all over the world, but none of them happened to be, going to Club Med. And my parents, they're also, they're very adventurous travelers. They like to go and visit cities and, go into the jungle, and, resort vacations were something we only did, maybe a handful of times in my life. So I had never experienced it personally, no. So I was going in really like, what's this going to be?
Were you shocked at all the crazy sign dancing you had to do? Like, did you have some culture shock in that regard?
Yeah, I just remember my first couple of days after I arrived at Club Med Cancun and just being so overwhelmed by everything that was going on. And, there's things happening morning, afternoon, evening, late at night. It never stops. And there was just so much going on around me, so many people to meet, so many things to learn. And I just felt, oh my gosh, like I'm never gonna be able to keep up with this. But I just remember also feeling like everything going on around me was so much fun. I mean, people were just having a blast. And I had never been in an environment like that, truly, where there was just such a fun atmosphere and everyone was happy and everyone was enjoying their job.
And I guess for you, reception, it seemed like a fit, right? Like, I mean, a
Right.
natural fit, right?
Yeah. So when I first applied, I was thinking, okay, where can I actually excel here and have something to offer? Because obviously at that point, I had never worked in a hotel before. I wasn't particularly athletic, and then kids, I enjoy kids, but working with kids all day, every day was probably not something I had the patience for. And I was just thinking, okay, what department is one where I know I could do good work? And, I'm very strong administratively. I'm a good problem solver. So I felt, okay, reception is probably my best bet.
Okay. And roughly how long did you spend at Cancun?
Yeah, so I was in Cancun. Originally, I was just going to do the summer. I just wanted that kind of short-term 6-month experience. And it's funny because I'm probably the only American that went through the Club Med system who didn't begin in Sandpiper, which was, of course, our American-based resort. So I got really lucky. I got to go abroad right away, right off the bat, because they didn't have enough, native English speakers on that team, and they needed more. So it was just kind of perfect timing, serendipitous once again. So yeah, I went into it thinking, okay, this is great. Everything is awesome. I'm just gonna do this one like short-term summer experience, and then I'll go home and get on with my life. But at the end of that 6 months, which I'm sure you remember, it goes by so quick. And by the time you really start to blend in and get the hang of it, your time is already up. So I remember saying to myself, okay, they're offering me to stay for the winter. So I'll just do that because it's better to have a year's worth of an experience than just 6 months. So yeah, let's do that. So I stayed for the winter season. And then at that point, Nicola came to me and basically said, I know you've already done your year here, and I know that you're kind of deciding if you want to stay or go home or potentially go somewhere else. But, in another season, we're going to be going to the French Alps to Valmorel. And if you stay with us in Cancun another 6 months, then you can come with us there. And that was just like the most incredible prospect to me, coming from, I was like a Southern California beach kid. Going to do a winter in the French Alps was like the most exotic experience ever. And I was so excited. So that's what I ended up doing. I stayed and in total was in Club Med Cancun for a year and a half, a summer, a winter, and then another summer.
Sounds like a no-brainer. If someone said, Greg, stay an extra 6 months in Cancun, I'd be like, that's 6 more months of Coco Bongo. Done.
Yeah,
Done.
it was not an arm twister at all. It
Yeah.
was a very easy yes. I was at that point living my best life. We had the most incredible team. I mean, I still look back on all of my different Club Med experiences, and I think that team in Cancun, 22 different nationalities, just like the most amazing people, exemplary in every way, and just such a bond that, I was more than happy to stay on. So
Now, when you go to the French Alps, you're doing a new position. If you can explain to our, say, the older geos who might
yeah.
might not know what concierge suite and exclusive collection is, that would
Yeah.
be great. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. This is a newer, I guess, product offering that is kind of becoming increasingly popular in the Club Med portfolio. But, for those of you who are familiar with Club Med, they don't use the star system, a 4-star or 5-star hotel. They use the Trident. For example, Club Med Cancun is a 4 Trident resort, which is kind of Club Med's version of saying it's a 4-star resort, right? In Club Med's strategic decision to start to move upscale, part of that strategy was creating a 5 Trident product that was still Club Med in every way, but with added comfort, added experiences, and essentially just added luxury. So the standards are different in terms of what you get if you stay in the exclusive collection. You stay in suites, you have extra benefits that the 4 Trident doesn't offer. And so the way that this works is that there are a number of Club Med villages around the world that are 4 Trident villages, but there's a exclusive collection or 5 Trident area or section. So that was the case in Cancun, and that was also the case in Valmorel. It was 4 Trident with a specific designated space that was 5 Trident. And there are also, entire Club Med villages now that are only exclusive collection, but there is that mix. So yeah, when I went to Valmorel, I left the kind of general resort front desk system and moved to the exclusive collection, which was higher luxury, essentially.
Is it much different?
I mean, the basic principles, of course, are the same. The way that you treat the guest, the Club Med spirit, you don't want it to be boring and stuffy because, the guests are still coming to Club Med because they want that special Club Med touch and that fun atmosphere. But it's different in the sense that, it's definitely a different price point. The expectations are higher. And then as a concierge, you're not really doing the same kind of general reception, check in, check out, take care of requests, coordinate with the other services of the resort. As a concierge, you're really tailoring the stay from A to Z for every single guest that's staying with you. So it's an added level of knowing the guests, being close to the guests, anticipating their needs. So it was a fantastic challenge, and I really enjoyed it.
Sounds like this new job comes with less crazy signs. Am I right?
Oh no.
What?
No,
Oh,
everything is still the same. It's just that your day job is different.
okay.
So
Well, you mentioned.
you're still integrated with the rest of the village. You're still doing the shows, you're still doing the crazy signs, you're still, dining with the clients. Everything about it is still the same.
Okay, so when Gala's freed from desire comes on, you got to go, is what you're kind of
Oh,
saying.
yep,
Okay.
absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
It's just that, my 8-hour, what I call day job, I was at the exclusive collection concierge desk, but then everything else was just the same.
So I'm wondering, does the concierge like exclusive collection act like one in say your hotels in New York? So and you'd like to problem solve. So is there anything that you recall that I don't know you made happen for a guest that wasn't easy to do
Oh
or
my gosh, yeah. I mean, there was some incredible experiences and stories from that season. For example, we had, and it's really interesting as well because winter in the Alps is a whole different ball game because it really is a seasonal experience and it's so international in terms of the GMs, the guests that are coming to stay. And every week, there's kind of a different nationality that's the majority because of what timeline coincides with the vacation week of that country. So I remember the first week of January, we were like 85% Russian because that's Russian Orthodox Christmas. So everyone has vacation in Russia. So that's when they all decide to go ski. Then, there were other weeks where it was all Turkish, other weeks where it was all British, other weeks where it was purely Brazilian. And it was so interesting because obviously all of these nationalities have different tastes and different expectations. They drink different things, they eat different things, they have a different idea of what service is. So yeah, I remember we had some guests who they checked in, we took them to the suite, and they didn't like the layout of the suite. And the gentleman, he asked me like, "Oh, can we just knock down this wall and have it just be more open?" And I was looking at him like, oh my gosh, I don't think he's joking. And it's so funny because Club Med in general, but then especially, in the exclusive collection, we operate on this principle of like, you never tell the guest no. That's kind of the golden rule, I guess, of hospitality, but certainly in Club Med is, there's no such thing as a no. You have to rephrase your answer to just instead like offer a different solution. And I was like, wow, I think that I'm really stumped on this one.
I would have went straight to Kramer from Seinfeld and went, "That's a load bearing wall. That's not coming down, Jerry." I would have had that in my pocket.
Or you really want to please the guest, I guess take out a hammer and start trying to take that thing down.
Yeah, call their bluff.
Yeah, that was a funny one. So there were some funny things like that, but in general, all of the guests that we had were lovely. And there's the occasional thing of like, oh, the fondue restaurant is full tonight, but this family wants to get in. Like, can you convince the restaurant manager to add an extra table or squeeze them in somewhere? And, I think that that's always kind of that's just part of the game. And
Excuse me, Sophia, are you saying there was a restaurant dedicated solely to fondue?
oh, yes.
Did I hear that right? Are you serious?
For those of you who don't know, if you've never been to a Club Med in the Alps, you have to go. Yeah, fondue Savoyard and raclette, amazing culinary traditions. Yeah. And of course, you eat so well at Club Med that you really can enjoy if you go.
And yeah, and you stayed the summer at the same resort too, correct?
Yes. So, I mean, funny thing happened during that season in Valmorel. I was out of my business unit as an American. I was kind of based out of the North American business unit. And then now I was over in Europe. So I kind of felt like I was worried, like, am I kind of detached from the Miami headquarters where like everybody's going to forget about me or no one's going to really like follow what I'm doing or check in with me? And at that time, I was kind of realizing that I wanted to continue this lifestyle and this profession for a while, but I wanted to grow. And so now that I was working in the exclusive collection at that time as a concierge, my kind of natural next step was then to become a supervisor, and then resident manager, which is essentially like you're in charge of the entire exclusive collection portion of the resort. So that was my goal. And I was really intent on making sure that I spoke up about wanting to have that opportunity and wanting the development and that hopefully, they would give me the chance to keep growing. And then while I was in Balmoral that season, a gentleman by the name of Areski Haddad, who was working in human resources at that time for the European region, he happened to be in the resort. My manager at that time, Natasha, who was still to this day one of my most amazing mentors, she said, "Oh, Sophia, you should meet Areski. He's part of HR. It's just good for him to know who you are and know that we have an American here." So, we kind of set like an informal meeting. We met and we started talking, and he started asking me about my career. And he said, okay, so what's your ambition here in Club Med? And I said, oh, I'd like to be a resident manager, exclusive collection manager. And then he looks at me and he says, oh, why not chef de village? And I was stunned. I couldn't figure out if he was like pulling my leg or if he really meant it. On top of that, the conversation was in French, and I was still kind of learning French at that point. I could hold a conversation, but I'm like, did I understand that right? And I just said, I think like the first thing I blurted out of my mouth was, oh, but there aren't any American chief of villages. Like, so I didn't really even realize that you would consider an American since it's a French company. And he's like, oh no, like on the contrary, we have a really diverse group of potentials. And I think that, if you're interested, you could fit into that group and we could develop you, and you have a real chance. Like you have a lot of qualities that we're looking for. And I was just like, I was so stunned. I completely didn't expect that at all.
Okay. So this was a chance encounter. But I wonder, do you think if you hadn't gone to Valmorel, because I always curious about fate. Do you think
Right, right. Well, I mean,
like
it definitely was a feeling like this was an important moment that I was lucky not to miss. And so then he's like, okay, like take my email. I'm gonna talk to, the teams over in Miami and check in with them about you. And, then like way later, I remember talking to Hammer about this. Hammer, of course, who was in charge of, director of village and resort HR at that time for North America. Those of you who have been in Club Med know who he is, of course. But I remember talking to him about it at one point, and I'm like, yeah, I jokingly, like, I had to go all the way to France to get scouted out for this chief of village gig. And he's like, oh no, 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 like we already, had our eye on you. And, his kind of noticing you and talking to you just kind of affirmed it. And then we were ready to put you in the program, and we believed in you. So I think if anything, it really helped my chances. But I was terrified, honestly. I wasn't even sure that I had it in me and that I really wanted to do it at first. So I had to think about it.
well, but then they give you resident manager. You still stay in the Alps. You go to Val d'Isère next, correct?
Correct. And that was kind of a relief because I was really scared, like, oh my gosh, what if I do this whole development program to become a chief of village and then I don't have what it takes, or, they decide like, oh, actually, we don't think that you're going to make it. I was so afraid of failing or of them kind of changing their mind about their initial kind of belief in me. So I was relieved when they said, well, just for now, continue on your current trajectory. Next winter, we do have an opening for exclusive collection manager in Val d'Isère. So you would stay in France for now. And, it's not going to be something that will be a rush. Like we'll make sure that you're really comfortable. And if it happens, like that you're really ready. If you're not ready, then it won't happen. So yeah, I stayed in France. So at that point, I was going on my third straight season in the Alps, and I went to Val d'Isère.
Okay. And you stayed for about what, 6 months there or a year?
Yeah, so this is kind of where things start to get interesting because I think that my entire kind of Club Med career up until that point had been fairly, I would say, like stable and predictable. I started in Cancun. I kind of knew that I was going to be staying there for a while. When the end of the season was coming up, they were telling me, okay, would like you to stay. Okay, then after this, you're going to go here. This is the plan. I went to Valmorel, same thing, stay here for the year and then you're going to go to Val d'Isère. So I was very lucky in the sense that I always kind of had an idea of like the next two steps. And then everything kind of changed because halfway through, by this time, I had officially been added to the potential chief of village development program. So we were meeting, having these calls and meeting every so often. And we had certain objectives and trainings that we were doing, from afar. And so I was in the program. I was considered a potential chief of village. And then I had only been in the program for like a month. And then I get this call saying, okay, you're going to go to the chief of village development center in Marrakesh. And I was like, what's that? I didn't even realize that I was going to already be included in this group. And so, it's they have it every year. They call it the POT CDV Development Center. And it's essentially like kind of like a training, but also kind of like an evaluation where all of the HR teams worldwide are there. Existing chief of villages are there. All of these kind of like Club Med stakeholders to have a week to basically interact with you, see you in training, do different assessments, do role playing, do public speaking, and then they kind of decide, okay, who's really ready sooner, who's like short term, midterm, long term, and then what's going to be the development plan for each of these people. So I went to Marrakesh, and then I came back, and I'm like, yeah, I think that I still need more time, but that was like a fascinating experience and just like solidified, okay, no, I really do think that I have what it takes. I remember going to that assessment and feeling more confident and doing better than I expected to. So that kind of gave me that boost of motivation. And then about halfway through my season in Val d'Isere, I get a call directly from Xavier Moufragi, who was at that time the CEO of Club Med North America. And he was very involved with all of the potential chief of villages, just as, out of interest. He was such a great developer, and he was always very involved in kind of keeping up with us and how we were going on our journey. And so he calls me and he says, listen, we have a need in Columbus. Can you go next week? And he's like, we haven't told your chief of village that you have to leave yet. We wanted to ask you first, like if you were even open to it. And then if you are, we'll get everything moving for you to leave next week and go to the Bahamas. And I was like, wow, okay. And you hear these stories in Club Med that things can really change on a dime, but it hadn't happened to me in that point. So I was literally in the French Alps in the middle of, I think it was early March, freezing temperatures, like snowfall like they hadn't seen in years. I flew home to LA, I changed out my bags, and I flew to the Bahamas, and that was that.
Yes, one of my favorite places in the world. I spent
Yeah, mine too. Mine too.
2.5 years there. Beautiful, beautiful
Oh,
Columbus, Ohio.
okay. So it's
Yeah.
home for you.
Yeah, it feels like I never asked to go there once, but Club Ed sent me there 3 times. But I love them for it because it's really the only place I call myself
Honestly,
home.
I think anybody who has set foot in that place just absolutely falls in love with it. There is something that cannot be explained. There's something magical in the air at Club Med Columbus Isle. It's just incredible.
Yes, and the people of San Salvador,
Yes,
shout
yes.
out Hansel Moss,
Oh
the
my
great
gosh.
one, the great one.
I remember meeting Hansel Moss on my first day. That was hilarious. But
Lucky.
it's funny because that was it was a strange time when that village was kind of in between chef de villages. Like someone had left, and the new person wasn't really able to come, and they didn't really have anyone filling in as an interim. And then the person who was going to be coming, who was Julien Latraz, he wasn't able to come right away. And so they were like, okay, we need to put someone there who can just kind of lead the team and hold down the fort for a month or two. So I'm thrown into this interim experience, and I was so nervous that I wouldn't have what it takes. But I'm like, okay, either it's going to go great or it's going to be a learning experience, but either way, here we go. And I remember walking into the resort, and there's this guy sitting at the restaurant eating lunch, and everyone seems to know who he is, and he knows everyone. And I'm like, okay, like, does he work here? Like, who is this guy? And so like I go and I say hi, and then I realize it's Hansel, who I've obviously heard about. And so, he was just giving me all this advice about the village and about, the teams there, and the local people and the island, and just telling me kind of like everything that he thought I should know in order to have an easier time kind of taking on this challenge that I didn't really have time to prepare for, just kind of thrown into. And so that was fantastic. He was so kind.
Yeah, I love Hansel. What a guy.
It
Great
was
guy.
funny though, because I was like, okay, so, then like the next day, I think I saw him like doing a photo shoot on the beach with some guests. And I'm like, okay, like, I guess, he's a photographer. And then I remember like a couple weeks later, one of the geos like, took his lunch break and went on his bike to go leave the village. And I'm like, oh, where are you off to? Because, there's not much going on the island other than us. And he's like, oh, well, I'm going to go train with Hansel. And I was
Yeah.
like, what do you mean train with Hansel? He's like, oh, he owns a gym on the island and he's a personal trainer. And I'm like, oh, really? Okay, well, I thought he was a photographer. He's like, no, 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 he does both. And then I remember at one point, like, we wanted to have a geo party, and I'm like, well, where can we have? And they're like, oh, let's go to Hansel's sports bar. And I'm like, what do you mean? This guy has a sports bar. He has a gym. He's a personal trainer. He's a like really a jack of all trades. I'm like, okay, it makes sense. But I mean, what a great guy.
Yeah. 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 He does it all, I tell you.
Yes, but very, very, dependable every time you need help or need some advice.
Now, before you get to your first village, though, you go through Sandpiper, La Caravelle, and Punta Cana. You spend like a summer in Sandpiper, 2 to 3 months in La Caravelle. Punta Cana, you're there from 2018 to 2019, correct?
Yeah, so this is kind of the chapter of my career that I call like the fixing it part of my career, because that's kind of how Kevin Batt explained it to me at one point. He was like, you're a pot CDV, like we really want you to become a chief of village. And as an American representing North America, we're just going to, rely on you when there is an issue in a resort or something that needs to be better. We're going to send you in and see if you can do it. And that'll be your test. So it was interesting because my first one was, going to Columbus for this kind of like short interim period, which ended up to be a great experience and everything went very well. And I think that's where I really got my first bit of credibility, right? As someone who could potentially really, really become a chief of village one day. And then Kevin tells me, okay, so, we have something going on in Sandpiper. This is going to be kind of your focus. We're having a problem with retention of, first season American GOs. So, go in and figure that out and, try to fix that for us. And that turned out to be great. I worked with Karim Faj and Sandpiper, Moroccan chief of village. He was by far my best and most memorable on the field mentor, like really teaching me what it means to be a chief of village and how to manage your resort and how to manage your team and really how to keep everything under control and how to make the guests happy. I mean, he really just had it all and he was such a great teacher. So then I finished up there, and then my next kind of job that Kevin gave me was, okay, now you're going to go to the French West Indies. You're going to go to Guadeloupe because we're getting more and more Americans going there, but the entire team is French. So there's a really low satisfaction from the American clientele. So go in there and, figure that out. So I went there and, was fully invested in being there. And it was such a great experience to be in, the French part of the Caribbean. It was just an interesting culture, interesting history, something different for me. And then I was like, I was maybe 2 or 3 months into that experience that Kevin called me one night and he said, you're not going to believe it, but I need you to go to Punta Cana. And this was like the week before Christmas in 2018. And I was like, all right, like it's game time. I want to become a chef de village. I'm down for the challenge and I'm happy to be able to experience as many villages and teams as I can. So then, yeah, I ended up in Punta Cana. And it was funny because that experience was really an interesting one because we were two potential chef de village working in Punta Cana. It was myself and then Kevin Gagne, Canadian guy who he's a chief of village today, actually. So we were two potentials, kind of both in the like assistant chief of village role, which was unheard of. I mean, they would never put two people trying to become a chief of village in the same resort together because just wasn't the way it was done. So we kind of both knew that this next promotion coming up, we both wanted it. And we both knew that there was a very slim chance that they would choose two North Americans. It was probably only going to be one or the other. So it was funny. It was a funny dynamic between us that season for sure.
Well, wait, we didn't get into why they sent you to Punta Cana. Was it because the water?
Oh,
Wait, was
yeah.
the water? What, the water was too blue. The pillows were too soft. What
No,
was going on in Punta?
have you been to Club
Yes,
Med Punta Cana recently?
no, recently, no.
Okay, so I don't know if you have seen the Zen Oasis since they constructed it. So the Zen Oasis is a newer part of the resort, more recently renovated, and it's an adult only section. There's 78 couples suites, a bar, a concierge service, dedicated housekeeping service, dedicated maintenance service.
Excuse me, Sophia. Did you say that inside a family resort, they made a section that's adults only?
Correct. Yep.
Wow, I did not
Yep.
know that. Cool.
Yeah. So, and it's called the Zen Oasis, and it's basically like its own little boutique hotel within the Greater Club Med. And they found themselves without a manager there, so I went and I took care of that for that season. And yeah, so it was both Kevin and I, and it's funny because he's from Quebec. I'm American. He's super athletic and very sporty and very outgoing, and obviously coming from the leisure side of things. And I was I wouldn't say quiet, but I had a different character, a different personality. I was really coming up from the hotel service side of things, and we were just complete opposite profiles. And, it's funny because today we're like best friends. He's still one of the best friends I have from my Club Med time of my life. Everyone I think expected us to really dislike each other and be super competitive and not get along and try to step on the other's toes. But we just ended up being this like incredible balanced duo. And then we both ended up actually making it into the promotion together. So that was probably one of my greatest memories from my time in Club Med, was that night that we were both surprised with.
That was my next question. So how did they do it?
So it's funny because, you know, the way that Club Med kind of selects and identifies its chief of village candidates. I mean, the thing that's so fantastic about Club Med is that every chief of village was an internal promotion. Nobody comes from the outside and becomes a resort general manager or a chief of village from Club Med. It just doesn't happen. You really grow within the system because they really want you to have that Club Med DNA, that kind of thing that no one can really explain just what it is, but that Club Med DNA. And so at the beginning, when we were at the development center that year, we were all kind of trying to, we were like, I think a group of maybe 20 that year, that were all kind of vying for that year's promotion, from all over the world. And we're kind of like, okay, so we're trying to calculate like how many CDVs are there? How many open resorts are there? Okay, so I guess they need four. They need four more. So they're going to choose four. And so they told us at the beginning, yeah, it's probably going to be a small promotion. It's going to be four. Then at one point they told us, no, it's looking like more like it's going to be six. And then at the end, it turned out to be 10. They promoted 10. So it was a big difference from what we initially thought. But it's funny because since Kevin and I, I think that we had this fear that they didn't want to make all 10 of us like all European or all North American, or they wanted to have, they needed a diverse group because we have villages from all over the world. We have more and more villages in Asia, opening villages all the time, all over. And, there's a different kind of criteria that you need in a chief of village profile, like people from different countries who are native in certain languages and people who understand certain cultures and all that good stuff. So, I mean, Kevin and I were just convinced like there's no way they're going to take both of us. It'll only be one, especially if they're only going to choose like 4 or 6 people. And apparently that was the case. I know now because it was maybe like a month or so before we got the news, and we were in Punta. And then Kevin Batt, who of course was the VP of operations at that time, and also I have to say one of the most incredible mentors and teachers I've ever had in my life, personally, professionally, everything. He was in the resort, doing one of his usual rounds, and he said to Kevin and I, okay, like I need to have lunch with you two today. We need to talk. And so like we go to the corner of the restaurant where there's no one around, and we're talking, and he kind of says to us, okay, guys, the promotion's coming up. Obviously, I really believe in both of you. And I'm telling Paris all the time that both of you deserve it. But, just in case you guys don't get it or one of you doesn't get it, let's talk about, what you're going to do next so that you can make it next year. And he's like, where would you want to go? Who would you want to work with? What region of the world do you want to go to? Like, let's talk about what's going to be the most beneficial for you, for your growth. And I just remember like both Kevin and I kind of sitting there, and we looked at each other And I think I was the first one to say it. I was like, Kevin, I really think this is my year. I'm at my peak motivation. I really want this. I believe that I can do it. And if I don't make it this year, I'm not sure that I want to wait another year, to be honest. And then, Kevin Gagne kind of echoes the same thing. He goes, yeah, I've been at this for 2 years now. This will be my third year of seeing if I'm going to get it. And if it's not this year, then I guess it's just not meant to be. And what we didn't know at the time, but what Kevin Batt told us after, was that after that lunch, he went and called Patricia Moretti over in Paris, who's of course the HR, in charge of all the chief of villages, and then also kind of managing that selection process for the new chief of villages. And he told her, you got to take both of them, otherwise we might lose them. So you can't just choose one or the other, and I'm not going to make that choice. So he kind of had to say to Paris, which one is willing to wait another year in case we don't have a space for all of them. And that's why he kind of asked us the question that way. So fast forward a couple of weeks, it's a Friday. And what Club Med does when they're doing this selection process of chief of villages is that if you are not going to get it, they call you and they tell you. And so all of us, like all of the plot CDVs from that time, we had this giant group message, right, where we're kind of like sharing, how things were going and just checking in with each other all the time. So that week leading up to the announcement, people started writing in the message like, okay, guys, I just got the call from Paris. Like, I'm not going to get it this year, but, best of luck for the rest of you. And so like little by little throughout the week, more and more people started writing like, sorry, guys, I got the call. It's not me. Da, da, da. And so I started to think like, oh my gosh, like, well, I haven't gotten the call and Kevin hasn't gotten the call either. So maybe this means that it's actually going to happen. And then that Friday, our chief of village, Pierre-Jean Montagnier, he was a French guy. He's also a fantastic chief of village. He's still actively a chief of village today. He was like running around all day, and I could tell that there was something in the air, but I didn't want to like think too much about it. But he was being very weird and very cryptic, basically saying, okay, like Kevin, Sophia, tonight after the show, I want the whole team in the theater. We're gonna do like, a surprise for the GMs, and we're going to do like a, something like, you'll see, I have it all planned, but I want the whole team in the theater, and you guys make sure you're there and make sure you're on time. We have a surprise for the guests. Oh no, I remember it. It was International Women's Day. It happened to be International Women's Day. So he told us we have a surprise for the guests after the show for International Women's Day. Make sure the whole team is there. We have a couple of bouquets of flowers, and we're gonna give them out to the women as they leave the theater. So, the show ends, we all get on stage, and then Pierre-Jean is talking to the audience about, International Women's Day, and then he kind of brings Kevin and I up on stage and gives us these two envelopes, and we don't really know what's going on, and we open the envelopes and read them. And I'll never forget, I opened my envelope, and it was basically a card that said, on behalf of Henri Giscard d'Estaing, Patricia Moretti, and all of the leadership of Club Med, we want to congratulate you on your nomination to the position of chef de village. And I just like immediately started crying, and I looked at Kevin to see like, oh my gosh, did he get the same news, or like, what's going on? And he's just completely frozen. And then he kind of looks at me, and, we just had this big hug, and it was just like craziness with music and cheering and confetti. And then, they surprised us and brought out our moms that they had flown out there to celebrate this event with us. And I mean, that was still to this day probably one of the greatest nights of my life. I mean, fireworks and champagne and just complete craziness. But definitely you have a feeling like, wow, this is something so special, and Club Med really knows how to celebrate these kinds of moments. And then you also really feel like, okay, this is something that's going to really change my life. So that was just such a beautiful memory.
Wait, did you say they flew out your mom?
Yeah. It was
how did she keep that a secret?
A good question. She didn't say a word, but they had asked like our friends and family to film like little video messages for us. And so we're all in the theater still. All of the guests from the resort are there. The whole Geo team is there. And so we kind of come off the stage and sit down and we're watching these videos, right? Like on screen from all of our friends and family, and we're crying. And it was just like, it was such a emotional moment. I have, pictures and videos from this that I'll treasure forever. And then Pierre Jean gets back on the microphone and he says, and I have the pleasure and honor of welcoming Linda and Maurice, our moms, and they came out on stage, and that was just like the greatest surprise. Stayed and partied with us all night, obviously.
I've been watching Survivor for 23 years, and it sounds like someone from HR Corporate is also watching Survivor because they do the exact same thing on Survivor.
Well, Hammer was there.
Yeah. I'm sure Hammer, you must be a Survivor fan. Okay.
Yeah, he also surprised us that he flew in for that moment as well. So that was awesome.
And I like the fact, because you mentioned Patrizia Moretti, she was my chief of village for my first time in Columbus. So I spent a year with her. So this is kind of a full circle moment for
my
me.
gosh.
Knowing that she had a hand in, promoting you.
Yeah, she is such a warm person. We all used to call her like our Italian mama. Every time she would call us to check in with us or see us, it was a big hug and kiss and, oh, my baby.
She has the best laugh. She has the best laugh. If you can get her to laugh, there's nothing better than hearing that.
She's a special person for sure. So that was a great moment. And Punta Cana, that was March 2019 now, looking back.
All right. So now you're going to be chief of village officially in Ixtapa, correct?
Yes. So I got it was very fortunate the way things played out because, as I mentioned, we were 10 newly promoted CDVs, and that was ending the winter and going into the summer. There were 3 open villages that needed a CDV. And so 3 of us got to start the chief of village job right away. So I was in Ixtapa, and then one of my counterparts was in Vitel, and then another one went to Kemer in Turkey. And then the rest, they kind of did one last summer, kind of still in the assistant role with another chief of village, and then went on to get their own resorts in the winter. But yes, so I got to start right off the bat in Ixtapa, which I don't know if you ever went there or worked there, but another very, very special place.
Big village too, right?
Yeah, I think it's probably what I would consider mid-size, 300 guest rooms. So it wasn't overwhelming, but Ixtapa, just the way that the resort exists and the layout of it really doesn't feel overwhelmingly big. It feels really charming and really intimate, actually.
And you got to practice your Spanish, no doubt.
Yeah, yeah. So, that looking back on that year, you go in, and I couldn't have asked for a better assignment for my first experience, like managing a resort, as a newly promoted resort general manager, just because the place is beautiful. The GMs are wonderful. The Mexican local staff that works at that resort were just incredible. I mean, this like natural warmth, this natural sense of hospitality, so kind, so welcoming. Then my G5 management team, that's kind of another Club Med phrase. The top management of a Club Med village is known as the G5. So that's your finance manager, HR manager, maintenance manager, human resources manager, and then you have also your rooms division and F&B managers. So depending on the size of the resort, it could be 5 to 6 people. They were all, extremely experienced and knowledgeable. And I was really able to lean on them and have a great dynamic with them. So I really had the time of my life that year.
You're there up until March 2020, then something happens, right?
Yeah. Wow. Gosh, it's so strange to look back on that time now because things just escalated so quickly. I remember it was the first week of March, and I was actually out of the village because I was in Montreal for the recruitment. We were trying to recruit new Canadians to come and work. And at that point, I knew that I was going to be leaving Ixtapa because I had been there for a year. And then my next assignment was going to be Columbus. So I was actually looking for candidates for both resorts at that time. So I was in Montreal. It was the first week of March 2020, and things were already starting to get a little strange. people were wearing masks on the plane, and people were, wearing gloves and a lot of sanitizer. And at that point, we had already completely closed all of our Club Med resorts in China. So I remember just getting that news, just before that, and thinking like, wow, this is really serious. Like, I wonder how long that's going to last. And I remember I left Montreal, got back to Ixtapa, and like, 2 days later, the news came out that the US was going to be closing its borders to the European Union. Cases were rising, and all of these different cities were kind of going into lockdown. And I just remember Kevin Batt texted us on our Chief of Village kind of like group message, and he just said, I'm going to send you guys a meeting link first thing tomorrow at 8 a.m. This is going to get really complicated really quick. And a week later, the resort was closed and everyone went home. It honestly gives me chills thinking about it, because it was such a sad and scary and stressful time to manage, and to make sure you're doing all the right things, and that you're kind of respectful of everyone's feelings, but then also not knowing when am I going to be able to go back to work and reopen the resort. So
Yeah, you never want to leave on a note like that, right?
no. And I remember it was just, I was so heartbroken, because I ended up going back home to LA. It was like kind of everybody was feeling so scared and insecure about like what was happening and how long this was going to play out. And I just wanted to be with my parents. So all of us kind of were on like this temporary pause until further notice. And no one really knew when we were going to be able to reopen any of the villages and kind of start to resume our business. But I remember, yeah, just being so heartbroken, because I had been on this high for a year where, in Ixtapa, like the vibe amongst the team was incredible. Our guest feedback was great. The business was great. It was just like all of you kind of know, it's like this rare moment where all of the factors are there for everything to just work perfectly, and you're just enjoying so much, and you're in such a happy place, and how special this thing is that you're part of. And then to have it just be cut short like that, I remember being so devastated.
But as I understand, you did get a call. I mean,
Yeah.
March to April, but around April, is it
Yeah.
someone from
So,
Montreal, another great Montrealer calls you? Just kidding. I
so,
didn't mean I was great. I meant Kevin Batt.
so, yeah. So I went home. I left Ixtapa. We closed. I went home middle of March 2020. I was home for 2.5 months. And, during that time, Kevin, who was, in charge of us, since he was our VP of operations, he did a really good job of still kind of like setting these weekly calls for us to stay connected, and to like discuss what's going on in the company, and discuss what's going on with the pandemic, and looking ahead to like when we do open the resorts, what's that going to be like? Let's start to think about it. And we stayed connected as much as possible, even though there wasn't really anything much for us to do at that point. And then 2 months later, it was the very end of April, and Kevin called me, and I said, okay, hey, what's going on? And he said, listen, we have an opportunity to reopen Sandpiper, because all of the other countries where we have resorts are not allowing it. But in Florida, we can open with restrictions, of course, and we need to, in order for the business to survive and, not lose so much money during this time of closure. We need to just get the business going again and open a resort, even if it's at super low capacity. It's something that we need to do. And he said, so you're up, you know? And it's just, I can't believe that I found myself in that position looking back on it, because of all of the chef de villages that were in like the North America, Caribbean region, I was definitely the youngest and the least experienced, just in terms of like years spent doing the job. But again, a serendipitous moment, because it just so happened that the only resort we were able to open was the one in the United States, and I was the only American, and I was the only one who would be able to do the job, because no one was going to be able to get a visa at that time. So he's like, I know that this is a lot to ask and it's a lot of pressure, but we're going to be with you every step of the way. We're all behind you, and like, let's do it. And so yeah, like a week later, I was there, and I spent about 3 weeks in Sandpiper, just kind of getting everything ready with the team before we actually opened.
And because someone noticed your Club Med CV, noticed you didn't do Sandpiper your first season, they were determined that you would have Sandpiper on your resume, right?
Yeah, and it's funny because I had at that point kind of dipped in and out of Sandpiper a few different times during my career. I obviously did that one summer season that I told you about with Kareem Faj. But then otherwise, like I remember at one point, like between my Alp seasons, they needed someone to go there for a month and help. So I did. And then another, they had like a full resort buyout by Renault, the French car company. And so it was going to be like a full resort buyout of French guests. And they needed French speakers to go and kind of help with that buyout. So they sent me there for that. So I had been in and out of Sandpiper, but I never thought, okay, I'm going to go there as the resort manager, as the chief of village, because obviously my dream was to be abroad and to get to go to other countries. But at that point, it was like, it was really just the chance of a lifetime to go back to work and to be kind of the first one piloting, how we're going to open a Club Med and operate a Club Med during a pandemic. It was wild.
Yeah, it must have been, especially because you're the first like person we've had on that's giving us what the whole COVID thing was like from a chief of village perspective. So
Yeah,
good.
it was a lot because, Club Med had commissioned this like scientific committee of, medical experts to help us develop what our protocols should be. And so we developed and branded this program called Safe Together. In French, it was Ensemble en Sécurité. And that was basically our new program of hygiene standards, of social distancing standards, everything that we had to do in order for this to be as safe as possible. And then obviously, the people that are choosing to go to a resort during the pandemic kind of know what that entails. But we also obviously had to reassure everyone that it was going to be a safe experience and that you're not going to get sick by coming to Club Med. But it was really tough because just operationally, everything about what we had to do was different. I mean, everything was different, from the way that we cleaned the rooms to the way that we served the food to, you know, how we spaced the tables out in the restaurant to how we welcomed the guests at check-in. Everything about it was different. So I just remember, I was like, we need to get the GOs and the team here as soon as possible, because this is going to take a while to train and to practice and to like get this to sink in, because they're just going to fall back to what they're used to doing, which, like, in Club Med, you're trained to do. And after a certain point, you know these things with your eyes closed. So it was like a whole process of like unlearning those habits and learning these new ones in order to just like not make any mistakes that could potentially be really risky. If people did get sick, or if there was a spread of the virus going around the resort, like all of those things that were a risk. So yeah, I honestly, it was the challenge of my professional life still.
Speaking of challenge, what's it like doing galas freed from desire wearing a mask?
Well, that was the crazy thing, because at the beginning we were like, okay, we obviously can't have like dance parties and crazy signs because people are still supposed to be social distancing. So, and we definitely can't, have parties inside the bar or inside the theater. We should try to be outside as much as possible. So that was really like touch and go, trial and error, try to like have as many things as possible outside, try to just do like live music or a DJ or something more chill. And we didn't really do crazy signs like in the traditional way. Like, of course, we did them at the pool and we did them, but tried to like have people, keep a healthy distance. But, it was really delicate, because I remember after being open for a while, I just decided, I'm like, the guests really want the Club Med spirit and they want to have a good time. Let's do a couple crazy signs, but let's do them outside, and let's do it where there's a lot of space. And, some people love it and some people were like, we can't believe you're doing this. This isn't safe. So it was really a challenge to kind of be aware of that full range of expectations from the people who, just wanted to have a good time and didn't even believe that the pandemic was a real thing, to the people who were hyper aware of every potential touch point and risk that could potentially spread the virus. And then you had like everything in between as well. So, but I would say, that first season, we were very conservative in the types of like entertainment and activities we were doing. And then as time went on, we kind of lightly started to introduce things back as like the numbers went down and as, the vaccine came out, for example. But yeah, it was definitely a challenge because you feel like, Club Med is this place where people come to be together with other people. That's just like inherent in the whole Club Med experience. And then in a pandemic, you're telling people to stay apart and to like not commingle and not get too close. It's kind of like contradictory, so yeah, it was tough. But I just remember having so many conversations with Kevin at that point, and he was saying, it's we can't take any risk because we need to convince the GMs that we're not doing anything irresponsible and that it's a safe experience to come to Club Med. And if anything risks that, then we risk potentially like not being able to open the rest of our resorts if it's not going well here. So I just remember like feeling this incredible responsibility to not do anything that could potentially throw off, our trajectory of being able to get back to normal. So yeah.
And after 3 seasons Sandpiper, now do you apply to corporate, like Club Med corporate?
Yeah.
Do they ask you to apply? How does that
No,
work?
so I'll give you the background of that. So, I've really been talking to you mainly about like my village experiences and like my chief of village journey, kind of like in parallel to all of that, all throughout my village career where I was working in the resorts and taking on these different positions and going to different locations. In parallel, I was always really involved in every one of the resorts that I went to in the Club Med Sustainability Directive and in the Club Med Foundation. So in every one of the resorts that I went to, I was like volunteering to be the Green Globe coordinator because every year, every resort had to be certified and then recertified with the Green Globe certification, which comes with a whole set of kind of like sustainability standards that the resorts have to meet and you have to audit. And so I took a huge interest in that, and I loved kind of leading that and being in charge of that. And then I loved organizing all of the fundraisers with the foundation and, the Worldwide Snack, where we would invite the local kids to come. And we had all these great partnerships. So I was always at the same time in parallel, really involved with that. And then the season that I was in Punta Cana right before I got promoted, I was obviously, as I told you, managing the Zen Oasis, the adult section of the resort. But all of us kind of had like a special, I guess you could call like professional project that was part of our kind of chief of village development plan. And mine was around sustainability and defining, a new sustainability program that we could deploy in the resorts and kind of what things we should focus on and what those pillars will be and how we can get that launched, and with Punta Cana kind of as like the pilot. So I ended up doing that, and it was really, really fun and fantastic for me. And I think that through all of my just kind of like voluntary interest and participation in all of these things, which really aligned like with my studies and my background and what I wanted to do long term, I kind of like got this brand internally within Club Med as being like, the CSR sustainability girl, who was always really interested in that, and people knew me for that. And so I started getting pulled in more and more to, these like sustainability projects that needed somebody to kind of oversee, or setting the standards for making sure that all of the resorts were in compliance with Club Med's sustainability standards. So I just became more and more involved. And then I remember it was at that time that I was in Sandpiper. I'd been there for a year and a half. And there was something as well, I think, about coming back and being in the United States for that period of time that really made me reflect on like, oh, wow, it's been so long since I've actually like lived here in the US, and it's kind of nice. And I kind of like, being back in my country, and I could see myself maybe taking a break and doing like a mission in the Miami office and seeing how that feels, and not like continuing on this like nomadic lifestyle of living in this country and then changing to this country 6 months later. So I that seed kind of got planted just by me being in Florida, which I hadn't lived long term in the US at that point for like 8 years. We were having like a chief of village seminar for North America. And Kevin was explaining to us kind of what the new strategic priorities of the company were going to be coming up the following year. And one of them was sustainability and accelerating Club Med really as like a sustainable hotel brand and becoming more aggressive with our sustainability objectives. And he was saying, we're going to be opening a position in Miami corporate office for someone to just lead that full time. And when he said that, I just like something clicked in me where I was like, oh my God, that's literally my dream job, going back to when I first applied to work at Club Med and I was so drawn to that part of the business. And I was like, I feel like if I can transit from this experience, this amazing experience in the villages where like I know the brand, I know the operation, I know the company, I know how things work. So that would already be a very easy part of it for me. To then working full time on this part of the company, it would just be like fate. And I remember I was like afraid to ask him if they would consider me for that position because I had only been a chief of village at that point for 3 years. And I knew that they were kind of expecting me to continue that role for a while longer, at least. I kind of drummed up my courage and I called Kevin one day and I told him like, I really want this role and this makes perfect sense for me. And here's why. And he was kind of like, yeah, you're right. It's perfect. I think it's meant to be. And if it's what you really want, like we'll talk to Paris and we'll release you for this next year from your chief of village responsibilities so that you can try this out and that you can do that job. So I ended up like, writing a letter of motivation of, why I wanted this experience. And then they ended up giving me the opportunity, which was amazing. So that's how that all happened.
Awesome. So tell me, Sophia, in all your time in Club Med, from 2015 up until, 2022, were there people that you enjoyed working with?
Oh, of course. I mean, too many to name.
Yes, yes.
But I do have, of course, at the top of mind, the people that really were the most influential in terms of believing in me and developing me and pushing me. One of them was like my first ever manager in Club Med, who was Julia Fitzgerald. She was the reception manager my first year working in Club Med, and she's still one of my best friends to this day. Another American as well. I think I mentioned her earlier, Natasha Lair. She was my manager when I was working in the exclusive collection. She was just so smart and sharp and talented and elegant. And I just remember like being a young woman looking up to her so much as like, this is who I want to be, So she was great. Obviously, all of my different chief of villages, I have to mention Kareem again because he, for years after even that we worked together, he still remained a mentor for me and someone who always gave me the right advice at the right time. So, all of those people. I have to mention another one as well, Mauricio Castro. I don't know if you know him. He's been in the Club Med world for a long time as well. Currently food and beverage manager, I believe, in Turks, but I first met him in Cancun my first season. He was the bar manager and he kind of took me under his wing and taught me a lot. And then, full circle moment as well. When I started in Ixtapa as a chief of village, he was the food and beverage manager. So just someone that I could rely on as someone who I had known for years and really trusted. And then, of course, my career wouldn't have happened the way it did if it weren't for this like incredible foursome working in the Miami office, which was, of course, Kevin Batt, Hammer, Howard McCarley. And then he didn't necessarily work in Miami, but he was heavily involved as well in our mentorship and our development, which was the infamous Hendel. So,
Yeah.
those four guys, really like the cowboys of Club Med North America, like they have walked the walk. They are so incredible and they have so many stories and so much to share. And I just remember, they arranged for us, kind of led by Kevin, when we were, potential chief of villages, like arranged this road trip, this like summer of development where we went to Punta Cana and then we went to Sandpiper and then we went to Cancun and spent a couple of days of each where he had like this curriculum of what we needed to learn and what it really meant to manage a resort. And it was just incredible. Those four were so pivotal for me. So I want to definitely give the respect where it's due.
Okay. And have you had time to think about, you miss anything about Club Med?
Of course. Even though I'm out of the Club Med world now, you're never really completely out because I still have so many friends and connections who are still actively in the Club Med world. So I maintain a connection to it, and I'll have it in my heart forever. I still go to Club Med too. I went last year to Turks with my parents for Christmas. I go any chance I get, but I think that the top things that I really miss are the things that I consider the things that make Club Med so unique that I truly don't believe exist anywhere else. And one of them just being the incredible camaraderie that you feel being part of a GO team, being surrounded by so many nationalities, so many languages, so many cultures, and how just like none of that matters. And everybody really is this unit, and you really feel that you're part of something and that you take care of each other and that you're all playing this incredible role to make something work, and you're just having a blast doing it. So definitely that camaraderie and that team spirit. I miss all of the traveling. I'm not gonna lie, the time that I was in Club Med, I got to live in Mexico, I got to live in France, I got to live in the Bahamas, Dominican Republic, Mexico again. I traveled to Morocco. I got to go truly all over the place and see some amazing places just by virtue of doing my job. So the opportunity to travel and move around and kind of constantly get that itch scratched is definitely something that I miss. And then I do miss the people as well. The people that I just mentioned, you forge a certain kind of connection and bond, I think, in Club Med. And I'm always careful to say like, oh, these people are my family, because I think that, there is a difference. Like there's your actual family, and then, there's something else, and that you should make that distinction. But I have to say that the connections that I have with people that I went through these experiences with, it's the closest thing, I think, to the feeling of family outside my actual family. And that's really special. So I miss the people that are really my best friends from Club Med, who I don't get to see as often anymore, but just grateful that they're still in my life.
Oh, that's very sweet.
Yeah, well, it's from the heart. I mean it. So, yeah.
Okay, Sophia, this has been so awesome. We're coming to the end of our interview, the supersized interview for January 2024. Before we go, though, I'd just like to ask you, like you sound like you don't regret anything. Like everything happened how it happened. You wouldn't change anything, right?
No, absolutely not at all. I truly think that the time that I spent in Club Med was the time of my life, and I'm so happy that I spent those years doing what I did.
I wonder if this occurred to your mom, like when your mom was a GO. I wonder if your mom ever thought, would it be weird if one day my daughter turns out to be a chief of village? Did you ever
We've
talk
we've
about that?
discussed it. It
Okay.
was nothing that she ever believed would ever happen, particularly because
Okay.
that drew me out of my shell, because I was in my shell for sure before going to work for Club Med, and now I have so much more, confidence, and I've developed so much as a person that I needed to go through that in order to be able to experience who I am today, I think.
And you sound like you would recommend it to anyone to give it a try, right?
Absolutely 100% resounding yes. I'm a huge proponent of the personal and professional development that one can have working for Club Med, and I would recommend it to absolutely anyone, whether you do it for a year or a couple of years. It's something that can only bring you good and only bring you more opportunities after.
Well said.
Thank
Exactly.
you.
Well,
And
Sophia,
I'm sure
yeah,
everyone who has been in my shoes also can agree. So
yes,
not just
yes.
me saying it.
No, 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 no. Yeah, everyone has mostly said yes, the exact same thing, and we're,
Yeah.
we're all glad we did it, and
So
definitely would
believe it, guys.
recommend it.
Believe it.
It's true. Well, thank you so much for being part of this special, New Year's Day episode. I want to thank you for sharing your story with us. It's so kind of you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a blast to, talk about all these memories again. And Happy New Year, everybody.
You heard it. Well, all right, everyone. That was Sophia Lykke, and we will see you all next week with another installment of my first season. Here's where we say goodbye to everyone, Sophia.
Bye-bye.
Take care now.